will be available on our Centre for Learning Landlord Hub. And today's webinar is with Chris Harrison, who is our Insight and Systemic Lead at the Housing Ombudsman Service. Chris put together the annual complaints review this year, and he's going to go through he's going to share his findings and insights into the report. So I'm sure you all can't wait to hear from Chris. So Chris, I'm going to pass it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Sana. Thanks for building me up. Hi, everybody. Good morning. My name's Chris. I have worked in social housing since about 2007, mostly in complaint handling roles before I joined the Ombudsman many, many years ago in 2013. I've worked in a bunch of roles here, both in sort of casework and back office stuff, including performance. I've got a bit of a handle on our data. And my current role, Insight and Systemic Lead, I've led special investigations, our paragraph 49 investigations. I've written insight reports, co-authored spotlight reports, and those involve all sorts of things, but it often starts with casework data, which I think is probably why I was asked to do the annual complaints review this year. So that brings me nicely on to talk about the report. Thank you, Sana. The ACR annual complaints review, I will say ACR throughout, forgive me, I love an acronym. Or is it an initialism? It's an initialism. The ACR is our yearly deep dive into how member landlords are performing in the complaints that reach our office. That means that in this report, in the ACR, we're talking about matters where the resident has complained about their landlord's response to a service request, and the landlord did not resolve that complaint to the resident's satisfaction, so they came to us. It's difficult to track an individual complaint from a service request to an ombudsman determination using publicly available data. It's something we'd love to be able to do. The best available analysis that we've got, which is using the regulator's tenant satisfaction measures data and matching that to our casework, we can see that roughly 4.5% to 5% of the complaints that you will receive end up coming through our door. That figure comes with an enormous caveat, but I just wanted to give a sense of the relatively small window into your service provision that we have. That being said, though, there's plenty of learning to take from what we see. So we know, I mean, obviously that tells you something. A certain percentage of your residents will complain, and about 5% of those might come to us. We know that every day social housing providers do vital work and resolve thousands, hundreds of thousands of service requests successfully. And we also know that the majority of the complaints that you handle don't end up here. So we encourage you to learn from your own complaints information. However, things do go wrong. And when they go wrong and they come to us, we do see consistent themes, which we like to use these reports and this insight to help you learn from. So when we're carrying out this particular product, we analyze our casework data. So we look at what's being complained about, what we're finding, what we're ordering, what we're recommending, what remedies are we making to put things right, and how well our landlords are following our complaint handling code. So we take all that casework data, we cut it every which way. We look at individual landlords, we look at regional patterns, national trends, differences between types of housing provider, differences between the number of homes that those providers own and manage, all of that. And ultimately, the aim is to be a bit of a bellwether. My previous member of staff referred to this as the canary in the coal mine quite frequently. I'm not sure I like that, but bellwether works better for me. But we encourage governance teams, members responsible for complaints to carefully review the findings of our reports and identify what you can do to improve services and prevent the needs for those complaints arising in the first place, and improve how those are handled and learned from. We do also look at ourselves in this, so we're considering the impact we have, how we can extend fairness, how we can improve. So this year, to be a little bit more outward looking, we worked with Housemark, who many of you will be familiar with, one of the sector benchmarking provider, and they analysed some of our data against some of the information they have on their members, along with sort of big picture data to give us a little bit of additional insight. Okay, next slide, please, Sana. Thank you. So those are the headlines. So in 2024 to 25, we determined over 7,000 cases. In those cases, we made over 14,000 individual findings. And as you see on that slide, we upheld over 10,000 of 10,000%. Slip of the tongue. 10,000, that's 71% of those individual issues. Should point out that both that figure and the rate at which we found severe maladministration are slightly down from the previous year, from 2023 to 24. Obviously still too high, we think, but down. So perhaps a plateau has been reached. By upheld, we mean we found maladministration. So that's often where a landlord hasn't met statutory requirements, hasn't applied its own policy and procedure appropriately, or has in some way behaved unreasonably or unfairly in some way which affects the resident. Another interesting thing from the findings there, or the proportion of findings, was that while the proportion of no maladministration findings went down, we also saw a rise of the proportion of findings in reasonable redress, which we thought was interesting. So I'll come to a bit more on that later. Next slide, please, Sam. Thank you. So we decided in 24-25, we decided complaints about 419 of our member landlords. Now that's about 25% of the membership, 25% of our member landlords. But it should be pointed out, those landlords own and manage almost 80% of the social housing stock in England. So there's a relationship there between those two proportions. 120 of those landlords had complaints upheld at least 75% of the time. So that tells us something. So with the reports, we published tables of the landlords who performed well, landlords who've improved, or performed poorly in our investigative casework throughout the year. And as before, we'd encourage governance structures and MRCs to engage with that content. We will be, or have been, I'm looking at Victoria, reaching out to those landlords who have improved to share their good practice, so that we can spread that learning and help others improve outcomes for customers. We also send individual landlord performance reports. Many of you will have seen those, and they're all published on our website. If a landlord has 5 or more findings in investigations issued in a year, they'll get an individual report. 281 landlords had those reports, which is quite a high number. I've got a good news slide next. So if you're on this list, congratulations. These are the 16 landlords who showed significant improvement in the rate and number of upheld complaints with our service compared to the previous year. But by significant improvement, what we mean is that they had 5 or more findings. They had a maladministration rate of under 60% this year. An improved maladministration rate compared to last year, and fewer findings of maladministration overall compared to last year. So good to see those landlords moving in the right direction. Fantastic work. And the two there that had complaints brought to us, but we didn't find maladministration once, are named there: North Devon and Pickering and Farrens. Both of those in the 1,000 to 10,000 home size bracket, and I will come on to talk about size brackets a little bit more in a bit. Okay, thanks, Hannah. Remedies, so orders and recommendations that we make when we make a finding in a complaint. We made nearly 27,000 interventions all told last year to put things right for residents. That ranges from ordering landlords to carry out repairs, paying compensation, make other sort of service improvements. It's a bit of an increase on last year. It's 24% up from last year, which is broadly in line with the increase in decisions we made. So we made 30% more decisions, 30% more work went out the door last year. Similar in a similar rise, the amount of compensation we ordered went up by that same proportion. Although the average amount ordered per case went down this year, which I thought was interesting. The other factoid about compensation is that over 40% of that 5.5 million was ordered in complaints about leaks, damp, and mold, which may not surprise anyone. Next slide, please. Thank you. Orders made by category. So there's sort of a list of the type of orders that we make and the proportions thereof. So that shows you the number of orders we made last year. We ordered over 4,000 apologies to residents for poor handling of their complaint. We're also reporting here on what we call wider orders. So wider orders are a relatively new business for us. We gained those new powers to issue wider orders under the Social Housing Regulation Act. That allows us to extend fairness a little bit more widely among residents. So we can order landlords to look beyond the individual complaint and address wider issues. 93 landlords received those wider orders last year. Failures in managing damp and mold, again, including sort of knowledge and information management issues alongside that, were the most frequent issues resulting in wider orders. All of those, the learning that landlords identify from those wider orders in several of those cases is available on our website. So I'd urge you to have a look at the learning that's come out of those, because there may be something for you there. Moving on. Thank you. So there are a few key headlines from this. It's not surprising to us or to anybody that the number of or the proportion of repairs complaints is rising, but it was disproportionate, we found, to the number of complaints we investigated overall. There's a 43% increase, you'll see there, in property condition complaints, which is sort of disproportionately larger to the increased output this year. Partly, again, that's driven by increases in complaints about leaks, damp, and mold, and about heating and hot water problems. It's that, leaks, damp, and mold was the most investigated complaint category, and as I've already said, those complaints accounted for 40% of the compensation we ordered. It's probably important to note that we upheld complaints about repairs at about the same rate as the previous year. So while the proportion's gone up, there's not much change in the proportion at which we're finding problems, we're finding maladministration. We're going to say it's still too high. But the majority of those were in relation to property condition. Some of those, we've also got a category there of estate management. Now that includes issues about repairs in communal areas, which we're starting to fold. We've modified our categories slightly this year, so that we can report on those in the round a bit more next year. There's also health and safety complaints. There was a little bit of a rise there too, in proportion to the number of complaints we made findings on. So that rising number of findings about property conditions, it tells us that residents are more aware than they ever have been before, I think, about their rights to redress, and the condition of the home that they can expect, or that they should expect. With the recent introduction of Awab's law, coming reforms to the Decent Home Standard, resident awareness and aspiration is only likely to go up. It's not likely to go down. Residents want a timely and quality repair service, and that's what landlords want to provide. We know that. Our recent Spotlight report, which I helped put together, Repairing Trust, sets out our findings about how landlords can improve services towards that aim and try to avoid complaints having to arise in the first place. Obviously, I'm a little bit biased, but I would encourage everybody to have a look at that report if you haven't already, and see how you're doing against some of the recommendations that we made in that report to try and stem the tide of those repairs complaints. Next slide, please. Thank you. So landlord type. So we upheld a greater proportion of complaints about local authorities compared to housing associations and other types of landlords. So about 30% of the complaints we decided were about local authorities, which is broadly matches the proportion of homes. Oh, I should point out, other includes sort of cooperatives, almshouses, voluntary members, abbey fields, that sort of thing. But yeah, when it comes to local authorities, so in complaint handling terms, we upheld 87% of disputes about local authorities complaint handling, which is quite a bit higher than housing associations at 73%. And the Housemark analysis told us that in terms of benchmarking data that they have and what we've got, and the TSMs and so on in the round, suggests that local authorities do typically report weaker performance on complaints responded to within time scale. And that's sort of shown by other measures. The local government and social care ombudsman reported a 18% increase in housing complaints. They upheld 85% of housing related complaints last year. And we noted that local authorities also account for the vast majority of the regulators' C3 and C4 gradings. Now, that's not to kick local authorities. I'm acutely aware of the struggles that local authorities are enduring in terms of funding, systems, all sorts of things, and the fact that they provide a much broader range of services than just housing, which is likely to impact the complaint handling resources that are available for housing complaints. But there's every measure that we have tells us that there are real challenges in housing complaint handling at local authorities as they get to grips with the world as it is at the moment. So that needs to be a priority for local authority leaders, in our view. We did also find that some housing associations within that 1,000 to 10,000 homes sort of size bracket, which I referred to earlier on with the landlords with 0% maladministration, those landlords are struggling more than other sizes of landlord to provide timely responses to complaints. And while we see housing associations performing better on complaint handling overall, there were at least 20 housing associations who had sort of complaint handling upheld rates at or above that average for local authorities. So if your individual landlord report suggests that you're up there, leaders of those landlords should probably have a focus on improving complaint handling and outcomes for residents as best they can. Okay, next slide, please. Some more good news, hopefully. So in this year's data, we did start to see evidence of improvement in complaint handling in our complaint handling category in our findings. There was a 7% drop, I think, in the maladministration rate for complaint handling. 117 fewer severe maladministration findings this year, despite the huge increase in casework output. So I think that's terrific. We also issued a similar number of complaint handling failure orders in 24-25 compared to the previous year. Again, despite that rise in casework and receiving more complaints overall. Just as a little backup for anyone who's not aware, complaint handling failure orders, or CHFOs, we issue those when a landlord doesn't comply with our complaint handling code. So that can include cases where there's an unreasonable delay in complaint handling, or evidence provision in a case we're investigating, or an unreasonable delay in compliance with our orders. So while that volume of orders remained the same, and coupled with the increase in cases coming in, we think that means that there's a proportional improvement in complaint handling performance, and that, along with the reduction in upheld complaints about complaint handling, we're cautiously optimistic that the complaint handling code is really starting to embed now. So that's some good news. Keep the we need to keep the foot on the gas, as the Americans might say. Keep your foot on the petrol doesn't quite have the same ring to it. Moving on to the next bit on this slide, we made 2007 findings of reasonable redress, which is over 800 more than last year. We make this finding. Sorry, Sana, I gave you a bad cue there. I'm still on the previous slide. Sorry, mate. I realised that halfway through the sentence. Yes, 2007 findings reasonable redress, 800 more than last year. That's a finding that we make where we find that there was a failure, where the landlord did fail to act appropriately, but did enough to put it right, to the Ombudsman's satisfaction. And that, I should point out, and I think we said this in the report, that doesn't necessarily always mean throwing money at the problem. There is a proportion of those reasonable redress findings where compensation was paid, but by no means all of them. That increase in reasonable redress, as I alluded to earlier on, is mirrored in a similar decrease to the proportion of no maladministration findings. So what that tells me is that, yeah, things might be going wrong a tiny bit more often, but they're being put right a little bit more often too. I mentioned this earlier on, the average amount of compensation we ordered per case has also fallen. So in the previous year, I think we ordered an average of it was over 1,000 per upheld case, 1,151 it says on my little note there. Last year in 24-25, that fell to £950 per upheld case. And again, along with that increase in reasonable redress findings, I think there's an improvement in complaint handling, in the redress offered by landlords in their own process, even where we're finding failings. So I think that's all positive. And while landlords are struggling with the mounting pressures that they're under, things are still going wrong. I think the sector as a whole is starting to get more adept at putting things right, which is the essence of good complaint handling. You can't always stop things going wrong. So that's my good news slide, and I hope that buoys people a little bit. Sana, this time we can move on. Thank you. Sorry about that. So yes, as I said earlier on, we worked with Housemarque this year. And the Housemarque did some analysis, as I say, with their data, with more publicly available data and our data on their members. And perhaps this is a no-brainer, but the landlords that have achieved the highest consumer grading, the regulated C1 grading, have lower upheld rates, lower compensation orders, and drawing a clear link between good complaint handling and good overall performance in consumer matters. Again, I mentioned about the local authorities struggling in this particular consumer grading regime. We do find, Housemarque also did find that larger landlords, particularly those with over 20,000 homes, were receiving larger compensation orders from us, and reported lower resident satisfaction levels. So something to look at for those landlords. Smaller landlords within sort of the 2,000 to 5,000 home size band, which includes a lot of smaller district local authorities, which again might speak to why they're in the struggling groups, may struggle to comply with that consumer regulation, according to the analysis we got there. So that ultimately leads to lower satisfaction levels, more complaints upheld by us. But I should point out again that despite the complaint handling problems that we find local authorities having, they're only slightly more likely than housing associations to receive a finding of severe maladministration. So it's not complete doom and gloom on that front. Housemarque's finding on our data around complaint handling failure orders, CHFOs, said that the fact that a landlord is issued one of those can indicate other problems. So it might be fewer stage 1 complaints responded to in target, lower complaint volumes, which may seem counterintuitive, but it really isn't. The more complaints doesn't necessarily mean you're providing a worse service. So lower complaint volumes can be an indicator that something's going wrong, and higher compensation orders for those landlords who received CHFOs. There's also what Housemarque described as a London effect. So the capital's figures are nearly always outliers compared to the rest of the country. More complaints, more determinations, more compensation orders, higher costs is a key factor to that. And that effect sort of spills out into the southeast as well. So the southeast, the rise in findings that we're making is second only to London. So there's that London southeast not bias but effect, if you like. So yeah, in summary, Housemarque sort of concur with us in that effective complaint handling can contribute to better overall satisfaction, can really work towards a better consumer grading from the regulator. Higher performing landlords receive higher stage 1 complaint volumes. So as I say, more complaints doesn't always mean bad service. They receive more stage 1 complaints, they handle them more effectively. So it all goes to reinforce the message that complaints are key to learning, to effective service delivery, and if they're handled well, it can lead to better all-round performance for all of us. Thanks, Sanna. Next. Thanks. So just the stuff that's coming up, bit of horizon scanning. So we know our members are working in complicated and a changing environment. The legal and regulatory changes coming up that I've listed on this slide. Awaab's law is going to require better performance in damp and mold cases initially, but obviously moving on to the other hazards as time rolls on. Consultation recently closed on reforms to the Decent Home Standard, which includes, I think, removing the maximum age requirement for components and potentially installing window restrictors and more. The regulator's competence and conduct standard is coming, which may well transform housing management over the next decade. And then there's AI, which is sort of challenging us and presenting opportunities, I should say, throughout the sector and across all areas. Lots of opportunities, lots of risk. We're changing our approach to some of the things we do. So you may have seen our new approach to special investigations, the paragraph 49 investigations. We've been testing that approach over the last 6 months or so. And it's now been launched. That sort of puts more emphasis on the landlord being accountable for carrying out the root cause analysis. And we're sort of trying to be more sort of staged and proportionate in our approach to those investigations, in the spirit of continuous improvement. We're also going to be responsible for investigating disputes about the brilliant acronym, the Social Tenants Access to Information Requirements, or STARES, which private registered providers will have to start to work towards. And yeah, as if that wasn't enough, time rumbles on. That, I believe, is the end of my presentation. I will just check that. If you can go to the next slide, Sanna, if that's contact us, then hurrah, it's all over. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm going to have a little bit of a breather while I let Sanna talk and field some questions. And well, thank you very much for your time. If you do have any specific questions after the session, our insight at inbox is there. So my colleagues and I field questions from that all the time, but obviously happy to take questions in the time we've got left. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Chris. So it is question time. You get a little bit of a breather, but not sure how long that's going to be for. So we have had a few questions come up through the chat, but if anyone also wants to ask by raising their hands, they can. So I'll work along in order. So the first question we had was from Jodie. And she asked, how do almshouses fare in all of this, please? We are a small volunteer-led village charity with 10 units. So that was around the slide where you were sharing the key findings.
Of course. I adore almshouses and everything they stand for. In terms of the specifics of the performance, as I say, the other bracket of landlord is performing, reasonably well, I think. I don't have a specific detailed statistical answer for you, Jodie, I'm afraid, but I can absolutely go and do a little bit of digging and come back to you with any specifics. It's something that's on the almshouses. I think we recognise that. I hope we recognise. I certainly do. The almshouses, Abbey Fields, and cooperatives are very different beasts, and require a different type of engagement from us, sort of different way of handling complaints, let alone a different sort of legislative framework. I know there's some work going on with our duty to monitor team around the complaint handling code and making sure that we are dealing helpfully and appropriately with almshouses. I'm very curious now to have a look at our stats in depth. So if you want to drop us a line, Jodie, I'm very happy to share the findings of that with you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chris. So the next question is from Louise. We've got read the tenant satisfaction measures. Many customers believe they have raised a complaint when in fact they have raised a service request. Monthly reports show that many of our customers have not raised a formal complaint, but think they have when asked. Is the Ombudsman working with Housemarque to consider what customers are being asked? The word complaint appears to be used as a generic term to raise a repair, communal or estate issue. So that was around the hallmark slides that you were going through, but yeah.
That is such a brilliant question. Thank you, Louise. It's the language is always difficult in these. I know exactly what you mean. One of the first things I came across in my complaint handling life was trying to explain the difference between a report of antisocial behaviour and a complaint about the way in which a report of antisocial behaviour has been dealt with. A complaint is, to some people, is a report of something that's gone wrong, and defining that service request stage is really difficult. I don't know how we get around that. There are probably some very smart statistical survey type people amongst us who can answer that better than I can. I don't. We personally, Housing Ombudsman and Housemarque aren't looking into the mores of the tenant satisfaction measures. I am absolutely certain that the regulator is, in terms of making sure that data is as sort of robust as possible and that everybody is answering the right question and asking it in the right way. It's sort of more a question about that, but it is a fascinating one. The language is so key. Our complaint handling code, I think, sets that out quite clearly, but obviously we don't necessarily expect residents to read that or have that in the back of their minds when responding to surveys. So yeah, there's a challenge there. I'm sorry I haven't, again, another question where I haven't quite got the answer, but there's definitely some thought to be given to that. Certainly by the regulator, I expect, and absolutely by us when we're interpreting that data. The tenant satisfaction measures are new data for us to play with, so we are very much cautious when we're looking at it, and it obviously comes with a bit of a caveat. As time rolls on, hopefully we'll have a clearer picture of this sort of thing.
Thanks very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chris. So the next question is from Jeremy. And Jeremy asks, I think you said housing associations with 1,000 to 10,000 units are struggling with complaint handling. Why do you think that is? Is it that larger associations may be more likely to have a centralised complaint team?
I have a feeling that Jeremy may have half answered his own question there, which I think is terrific. There's the argument about centralized complaints team is a very interesting one because it will work for some and it won't work for others. And I'm not sure I'm qualified to say what the criteria there should be. I think the 1,000 10,000 bracket is big, and I think it might be a little bit more nuanced than that split allows us to be. It could well be that the landlords in the lower end of that bracket aren't struggling as much. Perhaps smaller patches, residents that they know, things can get dealt with quicker. When you get into 10,000 unit land, you're outside, you're covering multiple boroughs perhaps, and spread a bit more thinly. It's really, there's some more thought to be given to why that is. I'm not very good at answering these questions, am I? I've got a lot of thoughts. But we do, there's definitely some more analysis to do there on the why. Thanks, Jeremy, and again, sorry, not really an answer.
That's fine, Chris. Thank you. We've actually got another question from Jeremy. Is there any insight or numbers regarding where HOS have assisted in mediation rather than full investigation?
Yeah, so where we've resolved with intervention, I think is what the ask is here. It wasn't massively. So it didn't jump out at us in the numbers, particularly. I'm just going to have a quick squiz through my notes to see what sort of proportion we were talking about there. Let's look. I'm desperate to have a question I can answer. You see, only about sort of if we take out the cases that we couldn't investigate, so the matters that were outside our jurisdiction or withdrawn before we investigate, the ones that we're actually able to solve with intervention is somewhere between 1.5% and 2%. So it doesn't feel that statistically relevant, and it's a real shame. We'd love to do more of that. When I started here in 2013, we were so much smaller. There was about, I think there were about somewhere between 30 and 40 caseworkers, and we were, the incoming volume wasn't anything like what it is now. And we did have a little bit of time to really sort of dig into what was behind a dispute and try and help both parties sort it out before it exhausted their complaints procedure if they were struggling with it at that point. And the early resolution business was definitely something we were very keen on. I fear that the incoming volume might have outstripped our capacity for doing that in any great volume. But I know it's something that we are now focusing on a little bit more. Our casework and assessment teams are really, really looking at every dispute that comes through to try and see what we can do to resolve them earlier. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. I think Julie made a comment about the TSM question being a good one and how TP09 has a significant impact on morale when
Of course it does.
effective. Yeah.
Yeah,
So thank you. So thanks for that comment, Julie. So the next question we have is from Tracy. Tracy says, I'm from Live Housing, so I'm really happy that we are featured on the slides as an improved provider. My worry is that we submitted a number of files last year and the number of them have not had a determination yet. So although it's great news we've improved, it doesn't really reflect practice as the files are outstanding and could all have maladministration findings. I really hope not. I had tried to explain this to the board. We've done well, but it's only a snapshot of time and isn't really reflective of the files we sent out during the period. I guess there will always be overlap, so I'll take the win on the improvement for now. Does HOS have a time frame which it is aiming to complete file reviews, as we have some cases that have been waiting for 12 months? Thank you.
Yeah, I was surprised that this sort of question didn't come up first, because it usually does. Thank you, Julie. And yes, we know. Oh, sorry, it's Tracy, not Julie. Julie was the last one. I was gonna, yes. We will always be an after the fact service, if you like. So we're always going to be looking back a certain amount. We do know that the wait time for some cases is way too long. We're working on it. I feel like we've been working on it for such a long time now, and the volume coming in just keeps increasing. We do have some. So the majority, I say the majority, just over 50% of the cases that we're doing, the decisions we're making, are within 6 months now, which is what we committed to, I believe, in our business plan. We know that for some landlords and residents, there are still cases later than that. We're working as hard as we can to keep the quality of those decisions high and tackle the volumes at the same time. Part of that is assessing those cases as they come in to see if they can be resolved earlier, and trying to get the least sort of complex cases sorted. But that does leave, the thornier cases waiting a little bit longer, especially if they're not massively high risk to the resident as well. So it's a difficult balance, Tracy. And again, I wish I had the answer. We are doing everything we can to try and get that done. Do recognise we will always be a little bit behind, but hopefully in the near future, not as behind as we have been.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
So the next question is from Shanna. It's an interesting one about AI. So landlords are seeing, an increase in long AI generated complaints, complicating resolution. Is the Ombudsman seeing more AI complaint escalations? How are these handled? And will guidance for landlords be issued on how to handle these types of complaints?
We are obsessed with AI and how it's impacting the sector. Yeah, we've noticed this as well. Not least in not only in complaint handling. I was sat next to our one of our recruitment guys the other day, and he's just seeing so many AI generated job applications. It's ridiculous. How are those handled? Well, we need to find the reasonable ground, don't we? This is new ground for us too. I suspect if it would be useful, we can absolutely think about having some guidance issued on that. I shall put that on the list of wants. I don't know that we've got a particular stance on AI just yet. I would always urge human contact. I know that that's sometimes difficult, but if you do receive a lengthy clearly AI generated complaint or a stage 2 complaint from a resident, I would really urge trying to talk to the human behind it first, to find out what's really going on, if at all possible. Let's try not to forget about the people in all this. I have seen cases where on the flip side, landlords are using AI to sort of assess the tone of complaint responses and stuff, and I don't really have a problem with that as a tool. But again, let's stay human centric as much as we can. That'd be my north star for AI.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chris. I think Julie had a further question about when HOS will be more up to date with determinations. I think you've already kind of addressed that, haven't you, Chris? So
we're trying our best. Yeah.
Let's see. And then we've got another question from Louise. I think again that's more to do with our waiting time. So we've covered that. I've got another interesting question from Nicola. Are adjudicators using AI in their investigations?
Not to my knowledge, but I can't really answer that with any real authority. I doubt it. Is my strong urge there. I doubt it. I blooming wouldn't. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. I think you're probably right there, Chris. So I've got a question from Siobhan. Good morning. Brilliant webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.
When a complaint goes to the Housing Ombudsman and the LGSEO have the same case, do you guys work collaboratively on a response? Many thanks.
The short answer is yes. So if there are obviously the local government social care ombudsman has very set jurisdiction, as do we, and there are complaints that we cannot consider that the LGSEO can, and vice versa. There is sometimes some overlap. In those cases, we do and we have carried out joint investigations. The way we work with the LGSCO is set out in what they call a memorandum of understanding, which is a lovely lofty term for those, and that is available on our website somewhere. I'm sure somebody smarter than me can find a link to it for you, but yeah, it is absolutely there.
Yeah, there is the memorandum.
I also think there may well be a news article about one of the recent joint investigations as well somewhere. So I'm sure there's some stuff there on the website that will give you a bit more detail than I can.
Thank you, Chris. I think we've got one more question from Louise. I have previously asked for extensions on information request deadlines where cases require a lot of work to pull together, but not received a response. Does the Ombudsman have a service level agreement for responding to queries through the portal? Not sure whether this is more of a casework policy question. Not sure whether you could answer that, Chris.
It absolutely is. It's been such a long time since I worked in casework. Yeah. I'm afraid I can't really give a good answer to that one. I would always aim to respond to queries within a couple of weeks at the very, very latest. But as I say, the volume of cases is just stonking, for want of a better word. So a bit of forbearance would be great. But if you're not hearing from us within 2 weeks or so, chase.
Yes. We just had another question in from from Jacqueline. Morning. We used to be able to send zip files to HODs when sending our evidence requests, but recently we've been told zip files can no longer be accepted. Instead, we have to send evidence over a number of emails because of the file size. I think that, again, is more of a
That's a very technical question. It's an IT thing, that one. I would say, I think, and I don't know whether this is the case for Jacqueline, I think our casework portal can accept zip files, but I may be wrong about that. I'm afraid I'm not technically qualified for that one at all.
No, I think that's more of a casework query. We'll see if we can find you the right person to speak to on that, Jacqueline. Thank you. So, okay, we've just got another one in. We've got a few more minutes left, and let's have a look. So, computer's playing up. Question for Chris: should we really chase you after 2 weeks?
Well, ideally, you shouldn't have to, but I would urge a reminder at the very least, if you haven't heard from us within that time, for information request extensions. I mean, explicitly.
Yeah, And then I think Jill's just responding to Jacqueline on the chat about how to send over files. So it looks like that's all of the questions that we've had, Chris. So you are able to kind of have that little rest now. Thank you
Time
so
for
much
coffee.
for
Yeah.
doing the webinar with us today. Just before everybody goes, I'm just going to close off the session. So the recording of the session and the transcript will be available on the Learning Hub within the next week or two. So do check back if you would like to see the recording. We'd also love your feedback on the session today. So if you're able to complete our evaluation form, that can be found as well on the Learning Hub. We do have a series of webinars coming up, and Victoria shared the upcoming webinars on the chat earlier. So if you'd like to learn a little bit more about some of the landlords mentioned in the report who achieved reductions in their maladministration rates, I really recommend you join us for our Learning from Complaints webinar, the next one being with One Manchester. So One Manchester are highlighted for achieving a 47% reduction in maladministration, and they'll be sharing how the organisation used this learning to drive their case improvement. So that webinar is due to take place on the 11th of February. So that's all from us today. Thank you so much to everyone for attending. Huge thank you again to you, Chris, for your presentation and answering the questions. So I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.